Howdy. So WordPress Security with Confidence came out of a need to clarify for myself and other people I knew in the WordPress community all of the conflicting advice about security with respect to WordPress. You've probably heard the idea that WordPress is insecure. You've probably heard the idea that, oh, you just need to install, let's say, SiteLock. Not to pick on them, but you just need to install this plugin or that. And none of that's true. The fact is there's code level stuff you need to do better as a developer in order to make sure your site's secure. And you also kind of owe it to yourself and any clients that you might have to really understand the landscape better. And that is where WordPress Security with Confidence comes in. Obviously, continue reading the page. I am very proud of this page, but let's look at what's inside because that's really what I want to show you here. So if you have access to the course, you'll find it on your My Courses page. You'll click into it and you'll actually be able to see it. If not, you'll see it on that page, but you won't have access to it. And the course is basically broken down into two sections. We've got a site owner section, which is for people who just own WordPress sites. So coincidentally, if you're a developer, you at least own that development site that you're doing it on, but probably you own a lot of other WordPress sites. So this covers things like how do you think about security in general. We talk about kind of underlying principles of security, like the principle of least access and why that matters. We also talk about myths that in general go around about WordPress security, kind of starting to break that up. We talk about personal hygiene. So a lot of security stuff comes out beyond WordPress, and that's kind of what this module touches on. We then talk about things that you need to think about, understand in order to really get a sense of how to harden WordPress, which is where a lot of education on this starts, is at this level of like, do this, don't do this, do that. And I think it's really important that before we do that, we get into the concepts and we think about this stuff accurately so we can then more accurately assess whether or not any individual step is good or bad. I also do have a section in here that is basically like, okay, I've heard of WordFence and I've heard of iTheme security. What's the difference? How do I think about them? We go into a pretty good amount of detail here on that. We also talk about how servers run WordPress and how to keep them secure. In general, this is not a thing where I tell you how to, configure your firewall and your Linux administration server account, blah, blah, blah. I just don't think that that's the right level for this course, and I am not an expert on that area. So I talk about how I think about that and why I do what I do there. How to collaborate with your clients, which is basically coming down to things like how do you handle telling them about security, telling them to update, and also how to deal with passwords. And then finally, we've got some interviews here, which I'll touch on again after we finish the developer section. So in the developer section, we really start with, again, those basics. Conceptually, what are we doing here? How does this work? And then I want to get practical. So we look at specifically disclosed vulnerabilities against WordPress plugins at a single point in time. And I did a pretty thorough analysis of the code and looked at them and what classes they were in and all of that kind of stuff. We get into that. We go into the OWASP Top 10, which is a great list to think about security in general, put out by a kind of deliberative body called the Open Web Application Security Project. I highly recommend knowing about that, and we go into a lot of detail about how those specific elements compare and contrast with a WordPress ecosystem. Then you can actually see me attack some WordPress vulnerabilities. I am not the best hacker in the WordPress ecosystem, not by a long shot, but I can run a few of these attacks, and it's kind of fun to see them and get a sense of what you're actually dealing with. Then we get into kind of where I think the heart of this content is, the code audit checklist. So you've got this code that you're writing that you want to make sure it's secure, or you've got code that you're about to release that you want to make sure it's secure, or you've got code that you inherit and you want to make sure it's secure. This audit checklist kind of gives you a way to think about the process of verifying that your code itself is secure. It factors in all the things we've talked about security throughout the rest of the course and builds up to actually doing this audit on a couple different plugins. So the first one is this one a guy named John Cave wrote a few years ago. And it's super useful because it gives you a clear sense of I can do this audit successfully. And then we also talk about, okay, so you're writing a new plugin. How do I personally, as the author of this course, think about securing it, and how do I do the features? And finally, we've got the developer interviews. And as I mentioned, there are 6 other interviews. These kind of broke down. Some of them were about how to secure your site. Some are how to improve it if it's hacked. That's what Michelle talked to me about. Or Aaron Campbell actually runs WordPress security, the team and the core devs who actually do it. So there are a lot of people here with a diversity of perspectives that are super interesting and complementary to the rest of the content in this course. And so that's why I think they make a really good capstone to kind of sum up what you've learned. And we kept them short enough so that hopefully they hold your attention very well. And with that, that is WordPress Security with Confidence. In general, I think it's just the right course on WordPress security. I don't think that anything else is going to give you that confidence, because a lot of people are going to give you 5 pieces of advice without giving you the context around it, which is really where this course shines, isn't giving you the entire concept, not just the individual steps. It tells you why the steps are good or bad. So hopefully that sounds interesting to you. Please go ahead and read the rest of the words, and if it sounds great, give it a buy. Cheers.